The scanner beeped 3 times, then displayed results that made no sense whatsoever. Officer Talris stared at the holographic readout floating above his desk. His compound eyes tracked across the data again and again. 2 human life signatures detected in Cargo Bay 7. That was impossible. The manifest clearly showed only one human aboard this transport vessel, Dr. Nina Reeves, a xenobiologist carrying research specimens back to Earth. The second signature registered as a juvenile human, approximately 4 to 6 cycles old based on genetic markers and body mass. Talris tapped his communication device with one of his 4 thin fingers. His exoskeleton clicked softly as he moved. Security team to docking port 12. Possible smuggling situation. Undeclared passenger detected. Within minutes, 6 armed guards surrounded the small cargo ship. The vessel looked worn but well-maintained, exactly the kind of transport researchers used for long journeys through quiet space lanes. Nothing about it screamed criminal operation, but Talris had learned long ago that appearances meant little when credits were involved. Dr. Nina Reeves emerged from the airlock looking confused and tired. She stood average height for a human, with dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. Her clothing bore the logos of 3 different universities. She carried a data pad and had the permanent slight frown of someone who spent too much time reading scientific reports. "Is there a problem, officer?" Nina asked. Her voice carried that particular tone people used when they knew they had done nothing wrong but were being treated like criminals anyway. Talris gestured to his scanner. "Our systems detected 2 human life signs aboard your vessel. Your manifest declares only yourself. Care to explain?" Nina blinked. She looked genuinely surprised. "That's not possible. I'm the only human on board. My cargo consists of biological specimens in stasis containers, all properly documented and sealed according to Galactic transport regulations." "Then explain this." Talris turned the holographic display toward her. The data clearly showed 2 distinct human genetic patterns. One matched Nina's registration perfectly. The other showed markers consistent with a young human child. Nina studied the readout, her frown deepening. She scrolled through the data with practiced ease, the kind of familiarity that came from years working with biological scanners. Suddenly her eyes widened. "Oh no, oh that's bad." "So you admit to smuggling a child?" Talris felt a wave of satisfaction. Quick resolution meant less paperwork. "What? No." Nina shook her head rapidly. "Your scanner is misreading one of my specimens. I can explain, but we need to not open that container without proper precautions." Talris bristled. His antennae twitched with irritation. "Our scanners are manufactured by the Peltharian Science Institute. They have a 0.001% error rate. They do not misread genetic signatures." "They do when they've never encountered that particular genetic signature before," Nina said. She pulled up files on her data pad, her fingers moving quickly. "Look, I'm carrying a honey badger, Earth mammal, species name Mellivora capensis. Your database probably has limited information on Earth fauna, and some of our genetic markers can trigger false readings in standard galactic scanners." Talris accessed the station database. The entry for honey badger was sparse. Native to Earth, mammalian carnivore, mass approximately 9 to 16 kilograms, omnivorous diet, known for aggressive behavior and thick skin. The image showed a small creature with black and white fur, stocky build, and what humans would probably consider a cute face. This small animal triggered a juvenile human reading. Talris could not hide his skepticism. "Earth genetics are complicated," Nina said. "Our evolutionary history involved a lot of shared ancestry across species. Some base genetic markers are similar enough that scanners designed for galactic species classifications can get confused. I've seen it happen before with dogs being flagged as human infants." Captain Hayes, the cargo pilot, had been standing quietly near the airlock. He finally spoke up. "She's telling the truth, officer. Cargo is legit. All permits in order. I've hauled scientific specimens before. Never had issues." Talris considered the situation. Station protocol was clear. Any discrepancy between manifest and scan results required physical verification. But if this human was correct about scanner limitations, opening the container would be unnecessary. Then again, if she was lying and there actually was a child hidden aboard, delaying could mean the smugglers had time to cover their tracks. We will verify the contents, Talris decided. Bring the container to Processing Bay 4, We'll open it under controlled conditions. That's really not a good idea, Nina said, her voice rising slightly. Honey badgers are not friendly animals. They're aggressive, fearless, and incredibly strong for their size. If you stress it out by moving the container and breaking the stasis seal, things could go very badly. We handle dangerous biological specimens routinely, Talris replied. His tone allowed no argument. Our containment protocols are sufficient for creatures far more dangerous than a 9-kilogram Earth mammal. Nina opened her mouth to protest further, then closed it. She looked at Captain Hayes, who just shrugged. The pilot had clearly dealt with bureaucratic station security before, and knew arguing was pointless. Fine, Nina said quietly. But when this goes wrong, remember that I warned you, multiple times. Honey badgers don't care about your containment protocols. They barely care about physics. Talris dismissed her concerns with a wave of one thin arm. He ordered his security team to retrieve the specified container from Cargo Bay 7. The team moved efficiently, scanning the sealed unit before loading it onto an anti-gravity sled. The container hummed softly as they guided it through the station corridors toward Processing Bay 4. Nina followed behind, her expression somewhere between resignation and dread. She kept muttering under her breath about liability waivers and Earth fauna warnings. Captain Hayes walked beside her, occasionally patting her shoulder in what he probably thought was a comforting gesture. Inside the container, Betty the honey badger stirred. The movement of her enclosure had triggered her awareness. Her stasis cycle was ending earlier than scheduled. She could smell unfamiliar scents filtering through the ventilation system. Her small, dark eyes opened in the dim interior. Betty was hungry, confused, and absolutely in no mood for whatever was about to happen next. The processing bay doors slid open with a soft hiss. 12 security officers stood ready, weapons drawn, containment fields activated. Everything was prepared for a potential smuggling confrontation. What they were not prepared for was what actually waited inside that container. Nothing in their training, nothing in their experience with hundreds of galactic species had equipped them to deal with an angry honey badger. Talris activated the container's external controls. Opening. 3, 2, 1. The container door released with a mechanical click that echoed through the processing bay. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The security officers stood in ready positions, their weapons trained on the opening. Talris watched the scanner display, which still insisted that a human juvenile occupied the container. Nina stood behind the safety barrier, her hands gripping the railing tightly. A low growl emerged from the darkness inside the container. It started as barely a rumble, then grew into something that carried genuine menace despite coming from such a small source. One of the security guards, a tall heptari with green scales and 4 arms, laughed nervously. That tiny thing makes such noise. He shifted his grip on his stun rifle, clearly unimpressed. Nina did not share his amusement. Please close the container. We can transport it to a proper xenobiological facility where they have experience with Earth fauna. This doesn't need to happen here. The container is already open, Talris said. Protocol requires visual confirmation of contents. Betty emerged into the light. She moved slowly at first, her stocky body low to the ground. Her black and white fur caught the harsh processing bay lighting. Her small eyes scanned the room, taking in the dozen armed aliens surrounding her position. Her nose twitched, sampling the unfamiliar scents. To most species present, she looked like an oversized rodent, maybe slightly threatening but certainly manageable. See, the heptari guard said. Just a small Earth pet. Why humans fear such creatures makes no sense. That's not a pet, Nina said sharply. That's Betty, and she's about to show you why Earth produces such careful xenobiologists. Betty's eyes locked onto the Heptari who had laughed, her muscles tensed. Then she charged. What happened next occurred so quickly that the security footage would need to be slowed down by half for proper analysis. Betty crossed the distance between her container and the Heptari guard in less than 2 seconds. Her low profile and surprising speed made her difficult to track. The guard fired his stun weapon, but Betty juked left, the blast missing entirely. She leaped, displaying climbing ability that shocked everyone present, and scaled the 8-foot-tall guard like he was a tree. The Heptari screamed, a high-pitched sound that seemed wrong coming from such a large creature. Betty bit down on his neck ridge, not hard enough to seriously injure but definitely hard enough to hurt. Her teeth pierced his scales easily. He flailed his forearms, trying to dislodge her, but Betty's loose skin and thick hide made her impossible to grab effectively. "Stun her," Talris shouted. 3 guards fired simultaneously. Betty released the Heptari and dropped to the floor just as the stun blasts converged on where she had been. The Heptari took all 3 shots and collapsed unconscious. Betty was already moving, charging the next nearest guard. A Korani officer, built like a boulder with rocky skin, tried to stomp on Betty as she passed. She bit his leg hard enough that he howled and stumbled backward into equipment racks. Sparks flew as scanning devices crashed to the floor. Betty spotted a ventilation grate across the room and changed direction instantly. "Block that vent," Talris ordered, but his team was in disarray. Half were trying to help injured colleagues. The others were firing wildly, missing Betty more often than not. The few stun blasts that did connect seemed to barely slow her down. Nina had tried to warn them. Honey badgers possessed incredibly thick skin, up to 6 millimeters in some areas, with loose connective tissue underneath. This made them resistant to bites, stings, and apparently stun weapons set for standard mammalian nerve patterns. Their metabolism was also unusually robust, processing toxins and tranquilizers faster than most Earth creatures their size. Betty reached the ventilation grate. Her claws made short work of the metal covering. She squeezed through an opening that looked impossibly small for her body. Within seconds, she had disappeared into the station's infrastructure, leaving behind a scene of chaos that would have been funny if it were not so alarming. The processing bay looked like a war zone. 5 guards were injured, though none seriously. Equipment lay scattered and broken across the floor. Alarms blared as the station's automated systems registered the breach. Talris stood in the center of it all, his compound eyes wide with disbelief. Nina walked slowly into the bay, stepping over debris. She found Betty's container and carefully examined it. The stasis system had malfunctioned during transport, exactly as she had feared. Betty had been awake and alert when they opened it, not groggy and docile as proper stasis would have ensured. "I tried to tell you," Nina said quietly. She did not sound smug or angry, just resigned. "Honey badgers are not like other creatures. They don't back down, they don't show fear. They attack threats head-on, even when those threats are much larger than they are. It's how they survive on Earth." Captain Hayes appeared at her shoulder. "Well, this just got complicated. How long can that thing survive in the ventilation system?" "Indefinitely," Nina replied. "Honey badgers can eat almost anything organic. They can go days without water if needed. Betty is probably exploring right now, trying to find food and establish territory. She'll defend whatever space she claims, which means anyone who encounters her in those vents is going to have a very bad day." Talris approached them, his exoskeleton clicking with agitation. "You brought a biological hazard to this station." "I brought a properly contained research specimen," Nina corrected. "You insisted on opening that container against my explicit warnings. This situation is entirely the result of ignoring someone with actual expertise in Earth fauna." "Can you recapture it?" Talris asked. His tone suggested he already knew the answer would be problematic. Nina looked at the ventilation shaft where Betty had disappeared. "Maybe, but it won't be easy or quick. Honey badgers are intelligent. Betty will learn the station layout fast. She'll find food sources, safe hiding spots, and she'll attack anyone who gets too close to her territory. You've essentially released an apex predator into an environment full of prey species who have no experience with Earth-level aggression. Station Commander Oral's voice crackled over the communication system. Officer Talris, report to Command Center immediately. We have a situation. The situation, Nina thought grimly, was about to get much worse. News of a loose Earth creature would spread through the station quickly. Panic would follow. And Betty, hungry and confused in a strange environment, would interpret that panic as a threat. Honey badgers responded to threats with overwhelming force. She looked at Captain Hayes. We need to find Betty before this turns into a disaster. Hayes nodded slowly. Little late for that, Doc. This already is a disaster. Betty discovered food within 20 minutes of entering the ventilation system. The shafts carried scents from every part of the station, and her nose picked up something. Delicious coming from Sector 8. She followed the smell through twisting metal passages, squeezing past junction boxes and filter units without difficulty. Her claws found easy purchase on the smooth surfaces. This was not so different from navigating rocky burrows back on Earth, just cleaner and with more artificial lighting. She emerged in the ceiling above a food court. Dozens of species sat at tables below, consuming meals from various worlds. The variety of smells was overwhelming and wonderful. Betty had not eaten properly since before the stasis cycle began. Her stomach demanded immediate attention. Without hesitation, she dropped from the ceiling vent. She landed on a table occupied by 3 Threnny merchants scattering their meal across the floor. The Threnny, who looked like oversized birds with 4 legs, squawked in alarm and scattered. Betty ignored them, focusing instead on the food. She grabbed what looked like roasted meat and swallowed it whole, then grabbed more and more. Screams erupted throughout the food court. Species that had never seen an Earth creature before now watched in horror as Betty demolished everything edible within reach. She moved from table to table, sampling dishes, rejecting some, devouring others. A Peltharian tried to stop her by blocking her path. Betty bit his leg and continued her feast. Station security arrived within minutes. They found absolute chaos. The food court had emptied except for Betty, who was now sitting atop a pile of stolen food, growling at anyone who approached. Her face was covered in various sauces. She looked satisfied but alert, ready to defend her claim. "Surround it," ordered the security team leader, a Vrenathi like Talris but with more combat experience. "Use maximum stun setting." The guards spread out, forming a loose circle. Betty watched them carefully, her small eyes tracking each movement. When the first guard got too close, she charged without warning. The guard fell backward, firing wildly. Betty was already past him, heading for another ventilation grate. This time she carried food with her. Her jaws clamped around something that looked like a large fruit. She disappeared into the vents again, leaving behind a food court that looked like a small explosion had occurred. Security guards helped their injured colleague while others reported the new breach point to command. Station Commander Oral watched the security footage with growing disbelief. The 4-armed Peltharian had commanded military vessels during his younger cycles. He had seen combat across 3 sectors. He had faced pirates, smugglers, and hostile boarding parties. Never had he imagined being outmaneuvered by a creature that weighed less than 10 kilograms. "Explain to me how this is possible," Oral said to Dr. Nina Reeves, who now stood in his command center. Captain Hayes stood beside her, looking uncomfortable. Nina sighed. Honey badgers evolved in one of Earth's harshest environments. They compete with lions, hyenas, and leopards for food. They raid beehives despite being stung thousands of times. They eat venomous snakes. Their entire survival strategy is based on being too tough and too aggressive for predators to bother with. "It is 9 kilograms, Oral stated flatly. "Weight means nothing to a honey badger," Nina replied. "They have the same fearless aggression whether facing a snake or an elephant. Size doesn't factor into their threat assessment. Everything is either food, competition, or irrelevant." Oral pulled up more security footage. Betty appeared in multiple locations across the station over the next hour. She raided a storage facility, somehow opening sealed containers to access preserved foods. She encountered a maintenance crew and chased them through 2 corridors before claiming their tool storage as temporary territory. She even managed to trigger a water recycling system, flooding an entire section while she drank her fill. "Deploy hunter teams," Oral ordered. "Bring in specialists from species known for tracking dangerous fauna." The hunter teams lasted approximately 30 minutes. The Korani trackers, famous across the galaxy for their ability to hunt prey through any terrain, found Betty in a maintenance junction near Sector 4. They approached carefully, using scent dampeners and silent movement. Betty ambushed them from above, dropping from an overhead pipe. By the time they recovered enough to report back, Betty had already moved to a new location. The Heptari stealth team did slightly better. They actually managed to corner Betty in a dead-end corridor. Unfortunately, the corridor was not actually dead-end for a creature of Betty's size and determination. She climbed the wall, crossed the ceiling, and escaped through a panel the Heptari had not even known existed. Within 6 hours, Betty had established a territory spanning 3 entire sections of the station. She had hoarded food in multiple locations, set up several nest sites, and attacked anyone who entered her claimed areas. 17 station personnel had been injured, though none seriously. Property damage estimates were climbing steadily. Nina sat in a station cafe, nursing a drink that tasted like burnt soil but contained enough caffeine to keep her functional. Captain Hayes sat across from her, reviewing damage reports on his data pad. "This is getting out of hand," Hayes said. "Commander Oral is talking about venting entire sections to vacuum." "He can't do that," Nina replied sharply. "Betty is a protected research specimen. There are laws." "Pretty sure station safety trumps research protection laws," Hayes pointed out. "If they can't capture her, they'll have to consider extreme measures." Nina set down her drink. "I can get her back. I just need them to stop trying to hunt her. Every attempt makes her more defensive and more aggressive. Right now, Betty thinks this entire station is a threat. She's operating on pure survival instinct." "How do you propose to change that?" Hayes asked. "By showing her that not everything here is dangerous," Nina said. "Honey badgers are intelligent. They can learn. They can even form bonds with humans, though it requires patience and respect. If I can get to her without a security team shooting stun blasts, I might be able to calm her down." Hayes looked skeptical. "You're talking about approaching an angry honey badger in an enclosed space." "I've done it before," Nina said. "Not in a space station, but the principle is the same. Betty knows my scent. We've worked together for 2 years. She trusts me as much as a honey badger trusts anyone." "Which is probably not much," Hayes observed. "Exactly," Nina agreed. "But it's more trust than she has for anyone else on this station. If I can find her main nest, bring her favorite foods, and approach slowly without any weapons or aggressive postures, she might listen." Before Hayes could respond, alarms sounded throughout the station. Emergency broadcasts activated on every screen and communication device. Commander Oral's voice carried a weight of authority and barely concealed frustration. "Attention all station personnel. The Earth creature designated Betty has been upgraded to a level 4 biological hazard. All civilians are advised to remain in secured areas until further notice. Security teams are authorized to use any necessary force to contain the threat." Nina stood abruptly. "They're going to kill her." The Galactic news networks picked up the story within hours. Breaking news from Immigration Station Delta 7, where a small Earth creature has brought operations to a standstill. The Threnny news anchor ruffled her feathers nervously. "The creature, classified as a honey badger, has injured dozens and caused extensive damage to station infrastructure. Authorities are struggling to contain what experts are calling an unprecedented biological hazard." The footage went viral across communication networks spanning hundreds of systems. Species that had never heard of Earth suddenly learned about honey badgers. The reactions ranged from disbelief to horror. A Korani merchant posted on social channels about her experience visiting Earth 5 cycles prior. "Humans warned us about geese. We laughed. Then the geese attacked our landing party. 3 of us were hospitalized. Earth creatures do not behave rationally. A Peltharian diplomat shared his own story. During trade negotiations in a place called Australia, I encountered something the humans called a cassowary. It chased our entire delegation back to the shuttle. The humans just watched and laughed. They said we should have read the warning signs. The Australian embassy on the Galactic Council station sent an official message to Delta 7. We understand you are experiencing difficulties with an Earth species. You have our sympathies and best wishes for a swift resolution. Please note that honey badgers are considered relatively manageable compared to some other Australian fauna. That message did not help station morale. Commander Oral found himself in an emergency meeting with Galactic Council representatives via hologram. 5 council members from different species demanded explanations. How could one small creature from a backwards planet cause such chaos on an advanced orbital station? The situation is under control, Oral stated, which was technically true only if one defined control very loosely. We are implementing containment protocols. Council member Thess, a Vrenathi elder with 3 times Oral's experience, clicked her mandibles in agitation. This incident raises serious questions about Earth fauna classification. We are reviewing the biological database now. The entries for Earth creatures are disturbing. She displayed images: great white sharks, saltwater crocodiles, hippopotamuses, Cape buffalo, Komodo dragons. The list went on. Each entry included warning tags that most galactic species had never needed: aggressive, territorial, venomous, disease carrier man-eater. Man-eater, another council member, a Korani, sounded confused. Humans are the dominant species. How do they have creatures that hunt them? Earth appears to be what xenobiologists classify as a death world, Thess explained. High gravity, extreme weather variations, and an evolutionary environment that favored aggressive, adaptable species. Humans survived by becoming the most dangerous species on their own planet. This statement sent murmurs through the council. Death worlds were rare. Species from such planets usually developed either extreme physical capabilities or extreme intelligence to compensate. Humans seem to have developed both, along with an unsettling ability to domesticate or coexist with creatures that would terrify most galactic citizens. Council member Vrath, a Heptari with military background, spoke up. If this honey badger is causing such difficulties, what about larger Earth predators? We have reports of humans keeping creatures called dogs, some weighing over 40 kilograms, in their homes, as pets. The database shows dogs descended from wolves, Thess added. Pack hunters capable of taking down prey several times their size. Humans bred them for thousands of years, creating hundreds of variants, some for hunting, some for protection, some apparently just because humans thought they looked appealing. The implications settled over the council like a heavy blanket. Earth was not just another member world. It was a planet that produced both highly intelligent tool users and an ecosystem of creatures that seemed designed to test those tools in life-or-death scenarios. We need to reconsider Earth fauna transport regulations, Thess declared. Starting immediately, all Earth biological specimens require specialized containment protocols and human-verified safety procedures. Back on Delta 7, Nina had finally gotten permission to attempt her retrieval plan. Commander Oral had been skeptical, but the alternative was venting 3 station sections to vacuum, which would create legal and political problems he did not want. If the human scientist believed she could retrieve her specimen, he would give her one chance. You have 2 hours, Oral told her. If you cannot recapture the creature by then, we proceed with extreme containment measures. Nina nodded. She had prepared everything carefully. She carried a bag filled with Betty's favorite foods, treats that she had packed specifically for the journey. Raw eggs, honey, dried meat, things that would appeal to a honey badger's varied palate. She also carried a small device that emitted ultrasonic signals in patterns Betty would recognize from their laboratory. Captain Hayes insisted on accompanying her. though he stayed well back and carried no weapons. Talris and two security officers followed at an even greater distance, monitoring via remote cameras. Nina had made them promise not to intervene unless she was in genuine mortal danger. Finding Betty was not difficult. The honey badger had claimed a maintenance junction in Sector 6 as her primary nest. She had dragged food, fabric, and various other materials into the space, creating a surprisingly organized den. Security cameras showed her sleeping in the center of her hoard, occasionally waking to eat or patrol the ventilation shafts around her territory. Nina approached slowly, making no sudden movements. She could hear Betty stirring in the junction ahead. The honey badger would definitely smell her coming. The question was whether Betty would recognize her scent as familiar or simply react to any intrusion with her usual aggressive defense. She activated the ultrasonic device. The signal was not loud, but it carried the same patterns Nina had used during feeding times back in the laboratory. A rhythm that meant food and safety, not danger. Betty's growling stopped. Silence followed, broken only by the gentle hum of station systems. Then a small black and white face appeared in the opening ahead. Betty's dark eyes stared at Nina. Recognition flickered in them, mixing with uncertainty and residual stress. "Hey, Betty," Nina said softly. She crouched down, making herself smaller and less threatening. "I know this has been scary. New place, strange smells, people chasing you. But I'm here now, remember me." Betty sniffed the air. She could smell the treats in Nina's bag. More importantly, she could smell Nina, a scent connected to food, routine, and the absence of threats. Nina slowly opened the bag. She pulled out a raw egg, Betty's favorite treat, and set it on the ground between them. Then she backed away several steps. Betty watched for a long moment. Then she crept forward, grabbed the egg, and retreated to her nest. The egg disappeared with a satisfied crunching sound. Nina smiled. It was a start. Progress came in small increments measured in eggs and patience. Nina sat outside Betty's nest for 3 hours, slowly moving closer each time she offered food. Betty took each offering but retreated immediately afterward, watching Nina with cautious eyes. Trust had been damaged by the chaos of the past day. Rebuilding it required time and consistency. Captain Hayes watched from down the corridor, shaking his head occasionally. "This is the strangest thing I've ever seen. Humans sitting on a space station floor, bribing an animal with eggs." "It's called behavioral conditioning," Nina replied without looking away from Betty. "Honey badgers are intelligent. They learn patterns quickly. Betty is learning that I mean food and safety, not threat." Commander Oral monitored the situation from his command center. The 2-hour deadline had come and gone. He had granted Nina an extension, mostly because the Council had made it clear that killing a protected Earth specimen would create more problems than it solved. Better to let the human try her strange methods. By the 4th hour, Betty allowed Nina to remain within 3 meters while eating. She no longer retreated to the back of her nest. Instead, she ate in the open, keeping one eye on Nina but showing less obvious stress. Her body language shifted from defensive to merely cautious. Nina had brought a small grooming brush, the same one she used during Betty's care routine back at the laboratory. She set it on the ground between them without comment. Betty sniffed it, recognized the scent, and her posture relaxed another degree. "You remember this, don't you?" Nina spoke in the same calm tone she had used throughout. "Remember grooming time? You always pretended to hate it, but you actually fell asleep every time." Betty made a sound that was not quite a growl, but not quite anything friendly either. A honey badger expression of acknowledgement, perhaps. She finished the piece of dried meat Nina had offered and, surprisingly, did not retreat. Instead, she moved slightly closer. Nina held very still. This was the critical moment. If Betty decided to trust her, the situation could resolve peacefully. If something spooked the honey badger now, they would be back to square one or worse. Betty approached the brush. She sniffed it thoroughly, then looked at Nina. The honey badger's intelligence showed in that look. She was making a calculation, weighing risk against memory, present circumstances against past experience. Nina slowly reached for the brush. Betty tensed but did not flee. Nina picked up the brush and, moving with deliberate slowness, began grooming Betty's fur with long, gentle strokes. The honey badger stood rigid for several seconds. Then, gradually, she relaxed. A sound emerged from her throat, almost like purring but rougher. "There we go," Nina whispered. "See, not everything here wants to hurt you." The transformation was not instant or complete. Betty remained alert, ready to bite if threatened, but the edge of panic and aggression faded. She allowed Nina to groom her for nearly 10 minutes, occasionally closing her eyes. When Nina stopped, Betty actually leaned against her hand, requesting more. Captain Hayes could not believe what he was seeing. She's petting it. She's actually petting the creature that terrorized this entire station. Talris, who had been watching through his scanner, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Humans truly are strange. They show affection to creatures that could easily harm them. "It's not strange to them," Hayes replied. "Humans live on a planet where everything is dangerous. They learn to coexist, to understand behavior and build relationships even with predators. We evolved on worlds where threats were manageable. Humans evolved on a world where threats were constant." This observation spread through the security team watching the feeds. It reframed everything they had witnessed over the past day. Betty was not an anomaly. She was a normal product of Earth's environment, and Nina's ability to calm her was not special talent but basic human adaptation to a death world existence. Nina spent another hour with Betty, gradually leading her away from the nest using treats and gentle encouragement. Betty followed, still cautious but trusting enough to leave her claimed territory. They moved through the corridors slowly, Nina maintaining a steady stream of reassuring sounds. They passed through areas Betty had terrorized earlier. Station personnel watched from safe distances, amazed at the docile creature following Nina like an oversized, dangerous pet. Several species asked how this was possible. Nina gave the same answer each time: respect, patience, and understanding. When they reached the docking bay, Betty's container had been repaired and properly prepared. Fresh bedding, adequate food stores, and a functioning stasis system that would keep her comfortable during transport. Nina showed Betty the interior, let her explore, and place treats inside. Betty hesitated at the entrance. She looked at Nina, then at the container, then back at Nina. The honey badger was not stupid. She understood that entering meant confinement again. "I know," Nina said gently, "but it's safe in there, and it takes us home, back to Earth, back to familiar territory. This station was never meant for you. Let's go home." Betty considered this for a long moment. Then, with a sound that might have been resignation, she entered the container. She curled up in the bedding, ate one of the treats, and looked at Nina one final time before the door sealed. Commander Oral approached as the container was loaded onto Captain Hayes's ship. The four-armed Peltharian looked tired but relieved. "That was the most stressful day of my command." "I apologize for the disruption," Nina said. "If your officer had listened to my warnings initially, none of this would have happened." "Noted," Oral replied. "We are updating all Earth fauna protocols. From now on, any transport involving Earth biological specimens requires human verification before any container is opened. Your species clearly understands your planet's creatures in ways our technology cannot match." Nina nodded. "Earth is harsh. We learn to respect that harshness rather than fight it. Every creature there has its place, its purpose, even honey badgers." "Especially honey badgers, apparently," Oral said dryly. "The Council is already receiving requests from xenobiology institutes across the galaxy. They want to study Earth fauna, understand how creatures from a death world operate. This incident, despite its chaos, has created significant scientific interest in your homeworld." "Good," Nina replied. "Maybe that interest will come with appropriate respect. Earth's ecosystem deserves both." As Nina's ship prepared for departure, she checked on Betty through the container's monitoring system. The honey badger was sleeping peacefully in stasis, her small body relaxed. She looked nothing like the terror that had brought a Galactic station to its knees. She looked like what she truly was, a survivor from a world that demanded constant strength, adapted to conditions most species could not imagine. Delta 7 returned to normal operations, but the incident lived on in galactic consciousness. The story of the honey badger became required reading in xenobiology courses. 3 weeks after the incident, Nina found herself giving testimony before a galactic xenobiology committee. The chamber was impressive, circular with holographic displays showing species representatives from across known space. Most had never visited Earth. Their knowledge of her homeworld came entirely from database entries, which had proven woefully inadequate. "Dr. Reeves," began Committee Chair Thess, the elderly Vranathi, "we have reviewed extensive footage of what is now being called the Delta 7 incident. We have questions." Nina had expected this. "I'm happy to answer anything." "Why did station scanners identify a honey badger as a human juvenile?" asked a Korani representative. "Earth's evolutionary history involves significant genetic overlap between species," Nina explained. "Humans share approximately 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, 90% with mice, and meaningful percentages with most mammals. Our base genetic markers can confuse scanners designed to distinguish between vastly different galactic species." A Heptari committee member spoke next. "Your world's database lists honey badgers as weighing 9 to 16 kilograms. How does such a small creature cause the documented damage?" Nina pulled up comparison images. Size is not the primary factor in Earth predator capability. A honey badger has skin up to 6 millimeters thick with loose connective tissue underneath. This makes them nearly immune to bites, stings, and many weapons. They have powerful jaws, sharp claws, and a metabolism that processes toxins rapidly. But more importantly, they have no fear response. "Explain this fear absence," Thess requested. "Most creatures experience fear as a survival mechanism," Nina said. "It tells them when to retreat, when to avoid conflict. Honey badgers evolved in an environment so competitive that retreat meant death. They developed a strategy of total aggression. Fight everything, fear nothing, outlast opponents through sheer determination. It's not rational by most standards, but it's incredibly effective." The committee absorbed this information with varying degrees of discomfort. A Peltharian representative raised one of his 4 arms. "Are all Earth creatures like this?" "No," Nina replied. "But many are. Earth's surface is 70% water, much of it containing predators that would terrify most galactic species. Our land has climate zones ranging from deserts to frozen wastelands, each hosting creatures adapted to extreme conditions. We have venomous snakes, spiders, and even mammals. We have diseases that jump between species. We have weather patterns that can destroy entire regions." "Yet humans thrive," Thess observed. "We adapted," Nina said simply. "We learned to understand predators rather than just fear them. We studied venom to create medicine. We observed animal behavior to predict threats. We domesticated some species, coexisted with others, and avoided the rest. Earth taught us that respect and knowledge are better survival tools than just strength." A Threni committee member ruffled her feathers nervously. "This explains the human approach to Dr. Reeves calming the honey badger. You saw it as a behavioral problem, not a military threat." "Exactly," Nina confirmed. "Betty was stressed and defensive, not evil or mindless. She just needed to understand she was safe. Once she recognized me and associated me with food and care, her aggression dropped dramatically. This is basic animal psychology on Earth." The testimony continued for 2 hours. Nina answered questions about everything from Earth's gravity to its seasonal variations to the specific adaptations of various species. She explained why humans kept dogs as companions despite their wolf ancestry. She described how humans farmed creatures that could easily kill them, like cattle and horses. She even explained the concept of beekeeping, which horrified several insectoid species. The committee's final report would reshape galactic understanding of Earth and its inhabitants. New protocols were established for any interaction with Earth fauna. Transport regulations were completely rewritten. Several xenobiology institutes requested permission to establish research stations on Earth, though they wanted human guides present at all times. Nina returned to Earth 3 weeks later. She delivered Betty to the research facility safely, where the honey badger immediately established dominance over her enclosure and terrified 2 new research assistants. Betty seemed perfectly content to be home. One evening, Nina received a communication from Captain Hayes. "You need to see this," he said, forwarding a Galactic news feed. The segment showed a Korani family at a zoo somewhere in the Outer Rim. They stood before an Earth animal exhibit, watching footage of lions hunting on the African savanna. The Korani children pressed against the safety glass, their eyes wide. "Humans live on the same planet as these?" one child asked. "Yes," their parent replied. "And they consider these creatures beautiful. They protect them, study them, even visit them in the wild. Humans understand their world in ways we are only beginning to appreciate." The news anchor, a Peltharian, added commentary. "This footage is part of a growing trend across galactic educational institutions. Earth fauna studies have become the most popular xenobiology elective, with enrollment increasing 300% since the Delta 7 incident. Students want to understand how humans develop the skills to coexist with such dangerous wildlife." Another segment showed a lecture hall where a human professor explained Earth's ecosystem to a room full of alien students. "The key to understanding Earth fauna is understanding context," the professor said. "A honey badger is not a monster. It's a highly successful species that found its niche through adaptation and determination. The same is true of every Earth creature. They're products of their environment, just like all of you." Nina smiled watching the broadcast. The Delta 7 incident had been chaotic and embarrassing, but it had accomplished something important. The galaxy now understood that Earth was different, that its inhabitants had developed unique skills born from unique challenges. Her communication device chimed. It was a message from the Galactic Council's Education Division. They wanted to hire her as a consultant for developing Earth fauna curriculum. The pay was generous. The opportunity to shape how billions of beings understood her homeworld was priceless. She accepted immediately. Months later, Nina gave her first lecture to a mixed-species audience of xenobiology students. She stood before a holographic display showing various Earth creatures: lions, bears, sharks, crocodiles, and yes, honey badgers. "Welcome to Earth Fauna Studies," she began. "This course will challenge everything you think you know about. Biological danger and survival. You'll learn about creatures that can kill with venom, teeth, strength, or disease. You'll study ecosystems where predator and prey exist in constant balance. And you'll understand why humans approach the galaxy differently than most species." A young Vranathi student raised her arm. "Professor Reeves, is it true that humans keep some of these creatures as pets?" Nina smiled. "Some, yes, we've domesticated several species over thousands of years, but domestication doesn't mean making something harmless. It means understanding behavior well enough to build mutual benefit. Dogs help us hunt. Cats control pests. Horses carry us. We give them food, shelter, and care. It's cooperation, not domination." "And honey badgers?" another student asked. "Can they be domesticated?" "Not really," Nina admitted. "Honey badgers tolerate humans at best. You can work with them, earn their trust temporarily, but they remain fundamentally wild. And that's okay. Not everything needs to be tamed. Some creatures should be respected from a distance." She pulled up footage of Betty from the Delta 7 incident, showing the honey badger's rampage through the food court. The students watched in amazed silence. Then Nina showed the later footage of her calming Betty, the trust slowly rebuilding. "This is what Earth teaches," Nina said. "Everything has the potential for both danger and beauty. Understanding the difference, knowing when to approach and when to retreat, recognizing behavioral cues, these are survival skills humans learn from childhood. We're sharing them with you now because the galaxy is getting smaller and you'll encounter Earth creatures more frequently." A Peltharian student spoke up. "Are humans considered Earth creatures?" The question made Nina pause. She had never thought of it quite that way, but the student was not wrong. "Yes," she said finally. "We're products of the same environment. We evolved alongside everything I've shown you. We're neither the strongest nor the fastest, but we survived by being smart, adaptable, and willing to learn from the world around us. In that sense, humans are the ultimate Earth creatures. The lecture continued for another hour. Students asked hundreds of questions. Some were scared, some fascinated, all were engaged. This was education that mattered, knowledge that could prevent future incidents like Delta 7. After class, Nina checked her messages. There was one from Commander Oral. Dr. Reeves, I wanted to inform you that Officer Talris has completed his mandatory training in Earth fauna protocols. He asked me to pass along his regards and his apology. He says he should have listened to your warnings. He will not make that mistake again. Nina sent a reply thanking Oral and wishing Talris well. Then she